Greetings, YouTube. At one time, freak shows, sideshows, and carnivals were dirt common. In the 18th and 19th century and in the early part of the 20th century, you'd find them everywhere. Some were mobile, and some were that stayed in place. And most often, they were showing off genetic mutations. Humans who had some kind of deformity of one sort or another were showing themselves off for public display. Sometimes they were artificial freaks, like the geek that would bite chicken heads off and things like that. Sometimes there were people who were obese and incredibly thin, though those could have genetic components as well. But in the early part of the 20th century, well, not too early, the 50s, I think, they began to fall out of favor because people realized that, in essence, you were pointing and laughing at people for who they were, for just the way they were born. And in fact, one of the cases that really kind of brought the whole thing to a head was the Lobster Boy. And the Lobster Boy was a guy, he was an adult, who had claws. That was it. And I believe he was also stuck in a wheelchair because he had other deformities. And his children had this deformity. And when they went in public, he wouldn't let them show off their hands. He made them wear socks on their hands so no one could see them because he didn't want people to get a view for free. And then someone went to one of the shows, and that person had the same deformity. And she's looking at the freak show. That's herself. And that really began to have a conversation that eventually society said, we don't want this anymore. Of course, we now have reality TV, so I don't know if we've gotten a whole lot further along. And now there are freak shows, but the freak shows tend to be of the manufactured variety. People doing suspensions, or body modifications, or sword swallowing, fire breathing. What's the spinning fire things called? I can't remember what they're called. Things like that. So there are sideshows still, but they are of the manufactured variety and not of the look at the freak and let's laugh at them for their birth defect variety. So why do I say this? And why is it only part of the title of this video? Well, I say this because I think that we are at the point in our society's development, our cultural development, where it's time to put certain types of humor in the same category we put the freak shows. And just as at one time it was acceptable to point and laugh at people because of their deformities, there are jokes that are being told in the world today where it's the same thing. You're pointing and laughing at people for who they are, or for their behaviors because they're different than yours, for their religion, or their sexual orientation, or anything else, because they're fat, because they're thin, because they're of a lower socioeconomic level than you. I'm a firm believer that humor should punch up at those in command and control. Because if it punches down, it's nothing more than cruelty. And just as we no longer have freak shows, allowing people to point and laugh at the genetic mutations of our fellow citizens, I think it's time to move our humor in the same direction. You could still tell jokes, but you don't have to be a racist, or a bigot, or a homophobe, or a transphobe, or a misogynist to do it. And if you can't tell jokes other than those types of things, then you're a pretty crappy comedian. And maybe you ought to take up plumbing or electricians or go work in a laundry. Because you sure as shooting aren't funny. Now you're going to say, well, you're stepping on people's freedom of expression. No, I'm not. I'm saying it's tasteless crap. And even though they can say it, I think we as a society can tell them, you don't get an audience. Just as there's no audience for the freak shows. I think that we can change society, move it forward, have it mature, so there's no audience for the people telling those tasteless jokes. And I don't think that's asking a lot. I really don't. Because if you can't think of any way to crack a joke than making fun of someone, you're not very funny. Now, and I'm not blameless in this. I have a 50-year friggin' history of making fun of people. And it's only very recently have I really begin to break down what I'm saying. listening to the words and looking at the meaning behind them. Why am I saying that? Why am I commenting like that? Why am I being pointlessly cruel to people around me? Why am I being a douche? You can change your humor. You can still rib somebody. You can still, make some mildly insulting comments to people you know, because you have in jokes and you things like that. But you don't do it to strangers. You don't do it to an audience of strangers and talking about other people often who aren't in the audience. You're belittling people for who or what they are. It's like amongst all the nerd culture, it seems to be the in thing to make fun of furries. I've never fathomed that. On the weirdness scale of 1 to 10, furries rank about a 3. They're not that strange. And some of the stuff they do is amazing when it comes to construction of cosplay stuff. Have you seen what the mer people have done? It's amazing. I just think that we can move ourselves forward like we did with freak shows. And I don't think it's asking much. I think it's just asking us to treat each other with decency and respect. You want to crack jokes about someone? Pick on the people in power. Make fun of the GOP or the Democrats or the Libertarians or the Socialists or the 1%ers. If someone declares themselves to be on a moral high ground and we find that they aren't, lambaste them. Have at it. They've set themselves up. Okay? We can still do these things. We can still roast people. And roasts are voluntary. If you roast someone who isn't there, that's not a roast. That's just being a douche nozzle. Being cruel to someone who isn't present at the time. Because I actually had someone use that example to me. Well, roasts are this kind of thing. No, roasts are voluntary. The subject of the roast is there because they want to be there. Because they know and respect and maybe love the people who have been invited to make fun of them. Because they're all comedians. They're all public figures. If you do that to a stranger, or you do that to someone else who isn't there, that's not humor. It's cruelty. And I want us to move forward away from cruelty. So why are you worried about humor? There's much bigger issues, and there are bigger issues. But everything is interconnected. It is a web. A warp and weft of reality. And we need to move every single part we can forward, even if it seems insignificant. Just imagine a generation of children raised without abusive humor. Wouldn't that be nice? But no. I'm staunching freedom of speech, according to everyone who I ever mentioned this to. Asking people to treat others with decency and respect is beyond the pale. It isn't allowed. But I'm telling you it is. And we can do it. And I'm not perfect. I've screwed up. I've made fun of people. I've probably done it in the last week. But I'm trying to get better. The other day, I interrupted 2 women having a conversation. Why? I wanted to talk. Male entitlement in its essence. I realized what I did. So the next day, I walked up to both of them and I apologized. And both of them said, "No, it's okay." And I said, "No, it's not. I'm sorry." We can change. Each of us can change for the better. We can mature, and we can learn to treat other people with decency and respect. And that is the absolute minimum we should be doing.